is also an issue of World War III. And World War III is between the British Empire, better known as the Anglo-Dutch liberal banking financial system on the one side, and the principal nations of Eurasia, Russia, China, India, and other nations are the targets of intended warfare by the British Empire, which is already turning Europe into a mere colony of the British Empire through the program of the Lisbon Treaty. If the Lisbon Treaty were adopted, and it's being pushed for adoption now, there would not be a single nation on the continent of Europe, west of Belarus and Russia, which had any sovereignty whatsoever. The British Empire would control the entirety of that region of Europe, from Portugal to the borders of Belarus and Russia, as a puppet of the Anglo-Dutch liberal financial interests. It is those interests represented in the United States for a long time have taken over control of the US dollar, control of the United States. Now they're moving in for the kill. The same cartel that put Mussolini into power in Italy, the same cartel that put Hitler into power in Germany. And we're now at the brink of something like a Hitler power taking over the United States. If they grab the United States, then they will grab all of Europe out of the Lisbon Treaty. If they control the United States and the parts of Europe under the Lisbon Treaty, then you will have an actual fighting war emerging on this planet. You will have dictatorship. You will have mass starvation. The elimination of whole sections of the population of parts of the world through starvation. And that's part of the British program. It's the food war. That's the situation.
After a lengthy ratification process, the European Union's Lisbon Treaty comes into effect today. A celebration ceremony will be held in Portugal's capital, Lisbon. The EU's first permanent president, Herman Van Rompuy, and European Commission President José Manuel Barroso will attend the ceremony. The Lisbon Treaty is expected to increase the powers of the European Parliament and speed up the EU's decision-making. It also aims to enhance the powers of the Union's foreign policy chief and boost integration among EU's member states.
It is now time to close that institutional chapter and to take up the Treaty of Lisbon for what it is, a treaty of opportunities, a powerful tool with which to tackle the challenges of our time. The Treaty of Lisbon will allow us to take decisions more speedily and more democratically. It obliges us to play our part on the world stage.
With the treaty, I hope that the EU will be more accessible and more understandable to the citizens.
The right to a preemptive nuclear strike against China is now part of US law. That's thanks to the National Defense Authorization Act. The Pentagon's also ordered a thorough review of when and how the US could strike at the network of tunnels believed to hold Beijing's atomic arsenal. There are certainly some that really say that the American president is powerless when it comes to going head-to-head with the military-industrial complex. Certainly at this point, though, we've been getting reports that there have been some rather peculiar high-altitude jet forays between China and Japan. Some Japanese jets tailing Chinese jets, basically playing some high-altitude games of cat and mouse, possibly reigniting another territorial dispute. They've been having disputes for quite some time now, certainly over some particular islands. Is it possible that those two could get involved in something slightly more intense?
It certainly could, and of course the more bellicose that the U.S. becomes against China, the more safe Japan will feel in either threatening or responding to Chinese aggression. So I think it really only serves to put a match next to this powder keg that is the Asia-Pacific region, especially now that really this is heating up and that the American attention is turning here. I think we're going to see more and more of these types of situations coming along that could justify even even further military intervention. So we have to look at these types of nuclear rhetoric that's coming out right now, not necessarily as an intent to strike anytime soon, but certainly as something to keep our eyes on as this rhetoric continues to ratchet up.
Now, Russia is warning it could make a preemptive strike against NATO's anti-missile defense shield planned for Europe if the US persists in going ahead, ignoring the Kremlin's opposition. Moscow says the system threatens its national security.
In the leadership of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, neither is morally fit to survive. They're as unmorally fit to survive as the people who backed Mussolini and backed Hitler back in the 1920s and the 1930s. And if we allow this to happen, we will get the same kind of treatment that the victims of Mussolini, Hitler, and so forth suffered. That's what we said. We have to win this war against that evil empire.
Behind me is the Kremlin, from which President Dmitry Medvedev did earlier deliver his annual State of the Nation address. In that address, the president highlighted the significance of the Russia and NATO joint missile defense plans that are being discussed. This, of course, echoes previous statements made at the Lisbon Russia-NATO summit, in which the president said that Russia is very keen to cooperate in such plans, but only if Russia can do so on an equal footing and as an equal partner. Well, in this particular address, Dmitry Medvedev made a rather ominous remark, saying that there's only one real alternative to such joint missile defense plans, and that's an arms race.
In the next decade, we have the following alternatives. Either we reach an agreement on missile defense and create a full-blown mechanism for cooperation, or if we fail to have a constructive agreement, a new stage of the arms race will start, and we will have to make a decision on creating new strike forces.
So a rather ominous warning there from President Dmitry Medvedev, outlining a possible scenario that, of course, no one wants to see, another potential arms race. So cooperation on missile defense with NATO, a key priority for Russia, made clear in that address. But the president was also keen to say that Russia's foreign policy is not simply about missiles and about defense. They also want to see a more pragmatic approach being taken towards trade with foreign partners and towards foreign investment. The president made clear that he wants to see more common economic zones being set up, specifically one in the Pacific area, stretching, as he said, from the Arctic to the Pacific Ocean, which would, of course, include China and Japan. So foreign trade, another key focus of this presidential address.
We need to step up economic diplomacy. It should provide specific results for modernization. Our foreign policy should not just be based on missiles. It should be specific achievements that are understandable to our people, creating joint ventures in Russia, producing high-quality, inexpensive goods, facilitating the visa regime. Such a pragmatic approach meets with understanding from our foreign partners.
So the need to improve Russia's trade links with its foreign partners a key focus there of President Medvedev's speech. He did, of course, also talk a great deal about domestic issues here in Russia. He talked about the need for greater modernization of both the economic and political spheres. He talked about the need to safeguard the future for Russia's next generation, to improve the life of its children, improving availability of health and educational facilities. He talked about the demographic problem here in Russia, the need to encourage families to have more children. He talked about the environment. He talked about the need to humanize the criminal justice system. But he also zoned in on the issue of corruption. And he said that the need to fight corruption in every sphere is still the top priority of both him and his government.
Считаю, что мы должны самым внимательным образом
The battle with corruption remains the top priority for us. I think we have to analyse what we have done and go ahead with it. Our experience shows that even facing a 12-year jail term does not stop corrupt people. We think that sometimes economic measures, such as a fine, could be more productive. So commercial bribery can be punished with a 100-fold fine.
So modernization, again the buzzword of this address, but the fight against corruption still the top priority for President Medvedev and his government. But for further analysis on the content of that annual presidential address, my colleague N.W.O, who is inside the Kremlin itself, earlier spoke to Alexei Pushkov, a political scientist.
A new arms race. What do you make of his statements? The translation we had seemed a little bit lighter. In Russian, it came off really strong. Am I right in understanding that?
In Russian, гонка вооружений means arms race, so the translation is completely right. I think Mr. Medvedev wanted to make a very strong point that the ABM system, which may be created jointly between United States, Europe, and Russia, may become a foundation for a new relationship. As they say in the United States, a game changer. Something which will dramatically change the strategic equation. If it does not happen, he wanted to say, then we may be off for a new period of confrontation. Looking from today, a new arms race does not look as a very high probability. But I think he was putting the stress on the fact that if we don't move forward, we will definitely move backward. And what is backward? What is behind our backs? It's a Cold War. And so if we do not progress in our relationship with the West and NATO, we may very well find ourselves regressing. And then the relationship between Russia and NATO, as it has happened many times in history, will become very cold again, and maybe we will face a new period of confrontation.
So Archie's N.W.O there discussing the finer points of that annual presidential address with Alexei Pushkov, a political scientist. So the main focuses of that address, the ongoing fight against corruption, the need for Russia to better improve its trade relations with foreign partners, but most importantly, the need for Russia to work together with NATO to develop its missile defense system.
Well, let's get more on this. Go straight to Washington. Our correspondent Lauren Lister's there. Hi, Lauren. Has there been any reaction so far in the US to Putin's statement?
Not officially in Washington, D.C., but many experts are discussing it. And to tell us more about what they're saying is a policy analyst. He's also president of the American Federation of Scientists and VP of their strategic security program there. It's Ivan Ulrich. Mr. Ulrich, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
So Prime Minister Putin is now saying that the U.S. missile defense system is the biggest block in coming to a new agreement on nuclear arsenals and reductions of them. So I thought President Obama, though, was already getting rid of these plans in September when he talked about stopping plans for missile defense bases in Poland and the Czech Republic. So why is this now a problem? What's the issue here?
Well, the plans to the Bush administration had plans for putting in missiles in Poland, radars in the Czech Republic that would have been able to defend against Iranian missiles and would have had some capability perhaps against Russian missiles. What Obama did in the fall was to change that to make it much more tailored for a Middle Eastern threat, and the system that he wanted to replace, put in Europe, would have very little capability against Russian missiles. But still, the missile defenses in Alaska and California are still there, and at least the Missile Defense Office in the United States claims that they would have some capability against a few Russian missiles. So it must be that that is what he's talking about today, and I think that the Russians are concerned about what the system in Europe might grow into in the future. I don't think that they're concerned about what today's plans are, but what tomorrow's plans might be.
Okay, so Prime Minister Putin says that this upsets the balance of power between the U.S. and Russia. Do you agree? Is this a real concern here?
I think it upsets the appearances more than the reality. I oppose the ballistic missile defense system in the United States both for strategic reasons and also because I don't think it will work.
Okay, why? Tell us why.
Oh, because countermeasures are so easy. Any country that has the technological sophistication of Russia or China that can build intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons can build easy countermeasures that would defeat the system.
So why doesn't the U.S. scrap it all together so that they can negotiate another START treaty?
That's a very good question, and I would argue that it's costing us more both politically and financially than it's worth. One part of the problem, of course, is that because the ballistic missile defense system is one of the pet projects, one of the pet legacies of the Reagan administration, it's very near and dear to the hearts of conservatives in the Senate. It'll be extremely difficult to get a START treaty ratified in the Senate because Senate ratification requires 2/3 of the Senate. It's a very difficult barrier. And if they're linked to scrapping missile defense, I think it would be almost impossible to get ratification. So it's just part of it is the politics.
So what do you think needs to happen? Okay, the START treaty has been a cornerstone in nuclear security in the world, you could argue. So what needs to happen to make this START treaty get renegotiated?
I think that the Russians are making a tactical mistake here because they're making a big deal out of something that I think and a lot of other scientists outside the government thinks just simply won't work against Russia.
And for the record, you're a nuclear physicist as well.
Well, yes, but I'm not, and I certainly am not speaking for the United States government here because we're spending billions of dollars on this. Officially, they think it will work. Scientists outside the government are quite skeptical of whether it would work. So the Russians are making a tactical error by putting a lot of value on this thing because presumably if they claim it's valuable, we're going to insist they trade off something that they think is valuable. So in the end, they're getting a deal where they're giving up something that's valuable to them in exchange for something that isn't very valuable, the missile defense system. But I think that the real danger here, the only danger, is that the system would only work against a Russian attack if it were the remnants of a Russian nuclear attack after a first strike by the United States. And then it could have some capability. What the Russians and the United States ought to do is to try to make those kinds of attacks impossible by taking their weapons off of alert.
All right, well,
and
we're going to
have to solve the problem.
There you go. Thank you for your offering of the solutions. And on that note, we are going to send it back to you in Moscow.
Yeah, a lot more thoughts could go into that one, couldn't they? Talking there to policy analyst Ivan Ulrich. Good to hear his point from the Strategic Security Program at the Federation of American Scientists. Both of you tonight, thank you very much. Talk more on the Russia and America dialogue about missile defence is the Paris-based political analyst John Laughlin joining us now, indeed, from Paris. John, hi there. NATO says the missile shield poses no threat to Russia because Moscow's intercontinental ballistic missiles are, quote, too fast and too sophisticated for this planned system to intercept. It's not convincing Moscow, though, is it? Does it convince you?
It doesn't convince me, no, and I find it pretty rich, actually, that the Americans should be saying this about their missile system when they refuse to listen to the Iranians, who say that their civilian nuclear program poses no threat whatever to anybody. Threats are a matter of perception, but also of reality. And the fact is that, as far as we know, Iran has no nuclear weapons capability and doesn't plan one, while the Americans are planning a missile shield, which, although it may not, they may be telling the truth when they say it's not directed against Russia, the fact is it's a new weapons system, and it can be presumably directed against Russia in a matter of seconds. So no, it doesn't convince me.
There was comment earlier on from a French defence official saying that Iran's nuclear programme poses a, quote, risk rather than a threat to Europe's security. What does it mean by that? Is there a point, therefore, of having the shield if it's just a risk?
Well, I don't really know what the official means. And in any case, I don't personally share that analysis. I don't think that Iran is going to attack a European country, still less the United States of America. That seems to me to be an absolute fantasy. It's not my view. And in any case, part of my answer is that one of the reasons why I think that it won't do that is that the costs in terms of retaliation of such an attack, were it to happen, are obviously immense. So Iran would have to be mad to launch such an attack. And that's why I find the whole discussion about the missile shield and the Iranian hypothetical attack completely fantastic.
Russia's been trying to talk reason here for a long time now. I mean, the latest words today, though, certainly ramping up the rhetoric, if you like. Russia's saying it could make a preemptive strike if, quote, very importantly, the situation worsens and reaches a critical point. What is that critical point?
Well, the critical point would be if there was some kind of conflict looming between the United States and Russia, and if there was some prospect of missiles being fired at Europe or across Europe to America. We're obviously a very long way away from that, at least I hope we are. The reason why the Russian minister made this remark, why the Russian defense official made this remark, is to show the logical conclusion of what the Americans are doing. The Americans are planning to install new military hardware on the continent of Europe, a continent which has struggled now for 20 years to rid itself of the inheritance of the Cold War. And the logical military implication of that act is that at some point a strike might have to be contemplated.
Will those words from Russia today make any difference? Do you think the US will take Russia's ultimatum seriously, given, of course, that any preemptive strike would be far away, I guess, from American soil?
Well, the fact that it's far away from American soil doesn't really make any difference, because it's an American system, and the Americans are trying to obviously extend their influence either through directly or through NATO over the whole of the European continent and on other continents as well. So the fact that any such attack wouldn't actually hit America is of no consequence at all. Would the Americans be bothered by the ultimatum? I think they should be. As I say, I don't think we are looking at a military conflict at any time soon. But I think they have to understand that this missile defense system is very serious. They may say it doesn't affect Russia or isn't intended against Russia, but like any weapons system, frankly, like a knife, it depends on who is holding it and on the circumstances of the moment.
Really, really briefly, if at the moment anyway the US still won't give legal guarantees that this shield won't breach Russia's national security, what is the way forward, do you think, to break this defense stalemate?
The way forward is either for the Americans to integrate Russia into the unified command of the defense system, of the missile shield, or to abandon it completely.
All right, ever so grateful for your thoughts. Paris-based political analyst John Laughlin there. Thank you.
US revives plans for a nuclear first strike on Russia coming up.
Soft assassinations of anti-NATO leaders. Star Wars, tested for Eastern Europe. And US space weapons, a quote, unofficial declaration of war.
Secret clauses of NATO membership state the US can and will depose Europe's governments on the orders of the White House.
Even if the electorate were to show a different inclination, secret protocols guarantee alignment by any means.
by any means means exactly that. Early NATO whistleblower Hans Otto exposed, quote, kill lists of leading European politicians that defied investigators' beliefs, but were subsequently confirmed by police. Officers found 15 pages of members of the German Communist Party to be assassinated and 80 pages on Germany's Social Democrats, one of the two major parties in the country. The documents state these assassinations would take place in case of X. X may refer, writes NATO scholar Dr. Daniel Ganser, to mass protests against a US-backed government or an election victory of a genuinely left-wing party. Instructions for such operations were kept at NATO military headquarters south of Brussels. Der Spiegel reveals a, quote, strictly secured wing of the building. A grey steel bank vault door prohibits trespassing to the unauthorized. Papers on NATO operations in Europe are marked American eyes only. When the EU Parliament officially demanded NATO stop these operations, which have become known by the codename Gladio, the US simply ignored it. Richard Cottrell is a former member of the European Parliament. NATO tried to ban his investigation, Gladio, NATO's dagger at the heart of Europe, which reports both so-called soft assassinations, smearing non-aligned EU politicians through mainstream media to make them unelectable, and real assassinations of politicians that still got elected. Richard joins us. Really great to see you. What's going on?
The United States is not prepared to tolerate governments which are unfavorable to the regime. Let's give the example of Syriza in Greece at the moment, which has just won, come top of the list in the European elections. This is an example of a government which is not going to be tolerated by the United States of America.
Yeah, you write a prototype soft assassinations British Prime Minister Harold Wilson, whose, quote, blasphemy in American eyes was to flirt with nuclear disarmament.
Yes, it's become a little bit more difficult to, shall we say, use violent means than it was in the past. So now you're going to see a lot more of the Harold Wilson tactics. And they will now increase, and I'll tell you why. Because this weekend, the European elections were held, and this has resulted in a very large bloc of anti-Europeans, led by the Le Penista, the National Front of France, which has come out on top in the European elections. Nigel Farage, leader of the United Kingdom Independence Party in the UK, who has come from virtually nowhere to become the leader of the third largest party. This will not be allowed to happen. So there have to be Harold Wilson-type moves now to remove those leaderships and those parties in those various countries.
NATO is attempting to supersede and actually replace the United Nations, reveals former Assistant General Hans Sponek. Its revised doctrine refuses the UN monopoly on the use of force, reports Global Research News. NATO now promotes itself as the military wing of the UN itself. The doctrine reserves the right to intervene anywhere in the world where there's, quote, movements of large numbers of persons. Its newly formed Partners Across the Globe programs already incorporated Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Pakistan and Iraq, and leads the occupation of Afghanistan. With the expected addition of states like Colombia and El Salvador, NATO will be on all 6 inhabited continents. Obama's foreign policy guru Zbigniew Brzezinski calls people in countries under US control vassals, a medieval term for slaves. American armed forces are now in over 150 countries. The unofficial figure, including clandestine US forces, is thought to be much higher. The Pentagon recently formed the United States Africa Command. Since then, NATO's dispatched the continent's most developed nation to a Hobbesian anarchy, overthrew the Ivory Coast and chopped Sudan's oil-rich southern half into a new state, leaving just 2.5 countries still outside its military grid. Leading military analyst, editor of the news list Stop NATO, Rick Rozoff, joins us. Great to see you. What will happen to people when the last countries fall to US control?
Global enslavement is the answer to that, and we see it manifested, for example, in ways that may not be immediately obvious, but after a certain amount of analysis close as we can see. For example, votes that have come up in the United Nations General Assembly in the last year and a half, 2 years, particularly I'm thinking on the question of Syria, we see that the U.S. through a number of factors, economic bribery, diplomatic blackmail, subversion, but also through bilateral and multilateral military programs, has been able to secure the overwhelming, compliance or servility of other nations. And that's one of the reasons why there's no diplomatic and political independence in nations, because they're beholden to the United States. And frankly speaking, they're fearful of U.S. economic and ultimately military retaliation should they not go along with U.S. diktat.
So today, I state clearly and with conviction America's commitment to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. I'm not naive.
Obama's duplicity is perhaps historically unparalleled. As soon as he envisioned a planet without nuclear weapons, he mushroomed nuclear weapons spending to levels above the height of the Cold War. He's expanded the infamous Bush doctrine of a nuclear strike against any country, regardless of international law. Full-spectrum dominance is the official term used by his administration, meaning, quote, control everything everywhere on sea, land, air, space, and outer space. US Space Command documents plan to even deny other nations the use of space. The one remaining power with the capacity to stop what the Pentagon calls full-spectrum dominance, writes intelligence analyst William Engdahl, is Russia. By design or coincidence, crisis in Ukraine's provided the perfect excuse for US military control of the region. 10 days ago, the administration tested its Star Wars system for Eastern Europe, which will now be rolled out starting in Romania. Obama brands his system the stronger, smarter, and swifter version of Ronald Reagan's initial Star Wars program. Under the plan, the US attacks Russia with nuclear weapons, while NATO missile defense in Eastern Europe mops up any attempted response. NSNBC News writes it's most likely and understandable Russia interprets NATO's Star Wars deployment on its borders as an unofficial declaration of war. Aerospace analysts told Global Research that US Space Command is planning a nuclear-first strike on Russia as well as one on China in 2016. Bruce Gagnon of the Global Network Against Weapons in Space joins us. Thank you very much for coming on. What do we know about the first strike plans?
This is in the planning process today. The U.S. Space Command practicing engaging in a first strike attack. And this is the key element here, is that these are first strike attack planning. These so-called missile defense systems are key elements in U.S. first strike attack planning. The idea is to hit China or Russia first with a first strike, and then when they try to fire their nuclear retaliatory capability, it is then that these so-called missile defense systems would be used to pick off any retaliatory strike. So after a first strike sword is thrust into the heart of China or Russia, then the missile defense shield would be used to pick off any retaliation, and giving the U.S. a quote-unquote successful first strike attacks. It has nothing at all to do with defense. It has nothing to do with freedom or democracy or any of those words that are used all the time to disguise the true intentions. It's all about full spectrum dominance.
Several decades ago, the first Star Wars initiative faced intense public and industry debate. Today, the US is controlled by just 6 mainstream media, all totally suborned to the White House. The result is an Orwellian silence on perhaps the most dangerous issue today. Europeans may decide they want their leaders chosen by NATO, or even that they support nuclear strikes on China and Russia. Since the US-controlled mainstreams never even informed the public these apocalyptic plans are on the agenda, the first people may hear of it would be this. Seek truth from facts. This is The Truth Seeker.
Russia is reviewing its policy on the use of nuclear weapons, but will reserve the right for a preemptive strike if its security is under threat. That's according to Nikolai Patrushev, the Secretary of the Russian Security Council. In an interview with a Russian newspaper, he said that the new document outlining the rules is aimed at preventing potential aggression against Russia and its allies. According to Patrushev, the new doctrine is based on the analysis of future threats to Russia, which include NATO expansion and America's nuclear capabilities. And he also listed nuclear proliferation, the production of weapons of mass destruction and international terrorism as major factors destabilizing global security. And for more on this policy review, we can speak to Alexander Pikayev from the Moscow-based Institute of World Economy and International Relations, who joins us now live from RT's newsroom. Mr. Pikayev, a very warm welcome to the program. So what does the Russian military doctrine currently say about the use of nuclear arms? Will the new one be a major shift in policy?
Well, so far there is no any new Russian military doctrine. Secretary Patrushev was talking about a draft document which used to be approved by the Russian president, and the draft would be ready by the end of the year. So far we are talking about draft. Existing Russian military doctrine, however, permits a first use of Russian nuclear weapons under certain circumstances. If somebody invaded Russia or had an attack on Russian military forces abroad, for instance, and under certain circumstances it could invite Russian nuclear attack. But it is not the first strike, so to speak. It would be response on a military attack made by the others. And here, Russia is not alone. The current Russian military doctrine in this particular point is similar to doctrinal documents of other nuclear powers like the United States, the United Kingdom, France. And in Russian case, the reliance on nuclear weapons is dictated by perceived weakness of Russian conventional forces, and such weaknesses should be compensated by Russian nuclear might. In the US case, it's much more controversial because the United States has a huge conventional predominance over all countries in the world put together, but still they rely on a first use of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, once again, why are these rule changes needed, and why now?
Well, again, we are talking about some preliminary thinking. It is not approved by the Russian president, so it's not a doctrine. But probably as a result of last year war with Georgia, Russian generals realized that Russian conventional might is even weaker than they expected, and therefore they are now talking that nuclear weapons could be used in regional conflicts, in even local conflicts. Recent doctrine permits that, but it didn't state that explicitly. And for the first time, Secretary Patrushev stated that the Russian nuclear forces could be used even in local conflict, which might reflect a peculiar reality that Russian conventional forces is not enough to have a guaranteed victory even in a local conflict. And this is very sad. I would also say that probably the time for such explicit statement is not right, because next year we will have a Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, and non-nuclear states ask nuclear states to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in their doctrines, but now such statements give an impression, which is not true. Everything was everything is in existent military doctrine, but it creates a perception that Russia increases the role of nuclear weapons in its doctrinal documents rather than decreasing it.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because once again, Nikolai Patrushev said that NATO expansion and America's nuclear capabilities remain potential threats to Russia's security. Well, does that mean the recent improvement in Moscow's relations with the US and NATO haven't affected Russia's military plans?
Well, the military base their forces calculations not on political intentions but on military capabilities, and Russia remains the strongest military machine in the world. There are dangerous debates on a new NATO strategic concept, which might involve certain increase of NATO military infrastructure close to Russian borders. And of course, the military has to take into account all developments, and they need to think about potential countermeasures. So this is a sad reality, but this is unfortunately the reality here in Europe after 20 years since the end of the Cold War.
All right, I got you. Alexander Pikhaev from the Moscow-based Institute of World Economy and International Relations in RT's newsroom. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your view.
Russia has reaffirmed it'll take measures if the US and NATO continue with their European missile defense plan without taking Moscow's view on board. The Foreign Ministry says it'll be forced into an, quote, appropriate response. Now, Moscow has been concerned over the alliance's failure to guarantee the project will not threaten Russia's security. Washington has been leading efforts for the missile shield in Europe, saying it'll help to protect the continent from countries like Iran and North Korea. Russia wants an equal part in the project, but there's been little progress so far in reaching a compromise. Now, let's talk to Russia's envoy to NATO and speak to Dmitry Rogozin. Good to see you, sir. So NATO has repeatedly said the project is no threat to Russian security. Why does Moscow not accept that assurance?
We would like to say that we would like to receive real guarantees from the United States side, because, some statement that missile defense program is not against Russia, it's okay, but who can confirm it? And how it's possible to do it. We would like to receive real legal guarantees. So ratification of some agreement that the new system installed in the European part of NATO can't represent the threat against Russian strategic potential. But we would like to have guarantees through the Senate and the presidential administration, no more.
Now, at last year's Lisbon summit, Russia and NATO, they agreed to work together on the European anti-missile project, but the alliance has not been quick in drawing Moscow in. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, in Lisbon summit, Russia and NATO discussed the possibility to cooperate in this case, and the President Medvedev declared the possibility of Russian Federation to start the discussion about the role and position of the Russian Federation in this European missile defense system. But the NATO invitation is very strange, so we can't understand in what kind of position we were invited by NATO countries. So we hope that during the next summit in Deauville, Presidents Obama and Medvedev could find some solution of this very strange situation. So it's an invitation without any final decision. From Russian point of view, we do understand that it's possible to create the common system. We need real business between the United States and the Russian Federation in strategic stability, growing process. But in any case, first step should be determination of architecture of the new missile defense system.
First step, talking about the architecture of the missile defense, Moscow previously warned that a new arms race will start if NATO pursues its plan. Do you think the alliance is actually taking this into account?
As I said, the situation is very strange, because we can follow up the talks on diplomatic and military tracks, but at the same time we are receiving the information about Romania missile defense base, about the plans to install this system, missile defense system on the Aegis vessels. So it seems to me that nobody would like to find a final solution, but the process is going by the United States without any understanding of European and Russian reaction for architecture of this missile defense system. I think that if we would like to construct something, some building of cooperation, we have to find preliminary the architecture, the plan of this work, and after that we can start the creation of the basis of this building. But no way to find a solution for missile defense without architecture cooperation.
All right, now let's turn our attention to that of Libya. At a news conference today, Russia's foreign minister called for an immediate stop to the bloodshed and the start of talks. Is that call aimed at the coalition as well, do you think?
You know, for Libyan situation, it's very simple from Russian position. We think that NATO should report every time, every week to the Security Council of the United Nations what NATO and some countries would like to do, how it's possible to implement the resolution of the Security Council. But from my point of view and from the point of view of my colleagues in the Russian leadership, we can see the some absolute jazz melody, not symphony, but some jazz, some interpretation, a very artificial interpretation of the UN resolutions on the Libya situation. So it seems to me it's a real violation of very important points of this resolution of Security Council UN.
All right, Dmitry Rogozin, the Russian envoy to NATO.